My name's Camille Charles. I'm professor of sociology, Africana Studies, and education at the University of Pennsylvania. My area of research is broadly defined as racial inequality, so I've done research on residential segregation, I've done research on racial attitudes and public opinion, and more recently my work has been in the experience of minorities at elite colleges and universities in the United States. I feel like there's some background information that's often missing in the conversations that I have, but also when I teach. And that really has to do with some historical perspective that helps us understand how we got to where we are now. So you'll always hear people talking about how they don't think that we need affirmative action, or that we shouldn't be offering these special circumstances for disadvantaged minority students or individuals more generally, because slavery was a long time ago and I didn't own slaves and my parents didn't own slaves, so why should we have these programs now? And I think the piece that's missing is really understanding that racial inequality is built into our history. It's part of the founding documents. It is how we came to be the United States of America. It's through conquest and slavery. And that until I was 3 years old, African Americans were hugely restricted in terms of where they could own homes and purchase homes. They faced all kinds of obstacles in their efforts to own homes, and that home ownership is really the biggest source of wealth accumulation in the United States. And so when we talk about why it is that African Americans, for example, live in the most segregated, poverty-stricken communities, they have the highest rates of unemployment, they have the worst outcomes in terms of school performance, we often forget that they have also had some of the worst circumstances around accumulating wealth and being able to pass that wealth on to their children, and that it is wealth that allows us to do the things for our children that really set them up for success later on. So it's wealth that allows us to pay for college without going into debt. It's wealth that allows us to help our children during economic downturns so that they can retool and become competitive or stay competitive in the labor market, or get help taking care of their children while they're going back to school and doing the other things that they need to do. And that they didn't start at the same place. The same is true for Latinos, it's true for Native Americans. The specifics can be different, but the idea is that the starting point was not the same for all of us. And until we make that part of the conversation from the beginning to help us understand how we got to where we are, it's really hard to move forward. And my research is really about reminding people that it isn't an accident that we got to where we are. It isn't about cultural deficiencies, right? So we can't say, well, if African Americans just valued education more, they would do better in school, and therefore they would have better economic outcomes. We forget in that statement that African Americans risk their lives for education and place extremely high value on education. It isn't that they don't value education, it's that poverty puts them in a circumstance that denies them access to high quality education, and that poverty comes out of centuries of inequality and stunted opportunities for economic mobility. The same can be true for thinking about Latinos who are largely immigrant, but also have a long history in the United States, but also faced discrimination and exclusion from institutions of higher education for some time, and they still face labor market inequities that make it difficult for them to get ahead as well. And so I think that my biggest task is to not only point out current day trends in racial attitudes, for example. So we know that there's still about 25% of whites in the U.S. who think that we should be able to sell our home to whomever we want, even if that means denying access to home ownership for any groups: African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, people who are not heterosexual. At the same time that we have laws on the books that have been on the books since 1968, making that kind of behavior illegal. And so I think that my role as a teacher and as a researcher is to circle back through that history and provide an awareness that people often don't have, or they don't understand the importance of that history on present day circumstances.